when I've been looking at the research base for visible learning, it's really intriguing that it's not so much the how, not the interventions. It's not so much the what we do, but it's the why we do and make decisions and how we think that matters. And you can take two school leaders and both school leaders could do exactly the same, but depending on how they think about what they do, you get quite differential effects in terms of the impact it has on you as a leader, on your staff, and critically on your students. So what we've been doing is focusing very much on how we think, and we started by looking at teachers, and more recently we're about to publish a book looking at how we think and the mind frames of leaders, and how those ways of thinking support our teachers to embed more of the high impact strategies that are in the zone of wonderful development, and how we can have, as school leaders, not only a great impact on our teachers, but work with them to have a great impact on their students. So this is why we've looked at these mind frames, and we've identified 10 of them. In many ways, we've actually got one that's repeated 10 times, but it is kind of variants of the same theme as you look through the different mind frames. And so what are they? Is probably the most important one that dominates them all is that when you walk into a staff room, I want you to say that my job here today is to evaluate my impact. Now, of course, it begs the moral purpose question. What do you mean by impact? And being clear about that, having a notion of what success criteria are, is pretty important. And when we talk about evaluate, it's not just giving teachers assessments or tests, but it's picking up the cues, picking up the questions they ask, picking up where they struggle and want to know more, picking up what they get excited and joyful about, and obviously then worrying about the whole implementation cycle of how well they're implementing, what fidelity, what kind of dosage, what kind of quality. And this is why we also spend a lot of time looking at school leaders have expertise to die for diagnosis. The I is for choosing the interventions. Second I, unbelievably important about the quality of our implementation. And the E in to die for is the evaluation and knowing what kind of impact we're having. And so we're spending a lot of time looking at this notion of evaluative thinking, and particularly amongst school leaders about how they work with their fellow teachers to look at those aspects of diagnosis, interventions, implementation, and evaluation. It's moving from what we know as school leaders and what we do now to being very clear and explicit about our success criteria. In the same way we want teachers to work with students, we want school leaders to work with their fellow teachers to co-develop these, to understand what it means to be successful in the short term, in the medium term, and long term. Many of us as school leaders want to have long-term impacts, but we need to have some cues and some ideas of what we're going to pick up in the short term to know that we're on the right track towards those long-term impacts. How we build trust and welcome errors in the staff rooms, opportunities to learn. We have many teachers who are doing stunning work in their classrooms, so that's wonderful. But we also have to not only listen to their voice, we have to listen to the voice of those that are probably not as having as great an effect. And they're not going to have these kind of debates. They're not going to be involved in these discussions unless we build trust and we see errors as opportunities to learn. How do we as school leaders get maximum feedback from our teachers and our students, but particularly from our teachers, about what's working well, what's not working well? What's the sense of the collective here? Do we have a common understanding of what it means for a year's growth, for a year's input? And how do we get feedback about how successful we are at doing it? And we're putting the emphasis there on the feedback side more than on the talking side and the doing side. Not that the doing and the talking is not important, but what's important is to understand what has been understood, what has been received, what has been acted upon. How we get that proportion of surface and deep learning correct. I'm sure as leaders, there's a lot of information we want to tell our teachers and work with them about surface information. But then at times we also have to stop and pause and say, yes, and how well have they understood it? How deep is it? How is it transferred into their classrooms? And we use the Goldilocks principle of challenge. We want to do things that are not too easy, not too hard, and not too boring. and engaging those teachers and seeing it as exciting to learn how to do new things in terms of implementation, how to treasure the things they're doing extremely well, the old things, and continue them on, and to make sure that that level of all of us love challenge. It's just making sure we pitch it at the right level. And then how do we create the resources and the time to deliberately practice to attain these challenges? And so what we've done in our book just about to come out on 10 Mindframes for school leaders is we've got some of the best people in the world to work with us, to talk about these. Janet Clinton's talking about the evaluation of my impact. We've got Dylan William is talking about the power of feedback and the power of assessment. We've got Zaretta Hammond talking about challenge and doing your best, not doing your best. Peter DeWitt talking also about the feedback notion. But Michael Fullen, I am a change agent, and I believe all my teachers and students can improve. Jim Knight's talking about the language of learning and the language of teaching, and how that language of learning is so critical to get our teaching correct. And so there are 10 chapters, 10 of the mind frames. And for us, this is the most key thing we worry about as how we develop great leaders in our system. It's about how they think. And so we're inviting you to consider about your thinking patterns, about how you go about making evaluative judgments, how you build that evaluative judgment in the teachers of your schools. We all want a cycle of improvement. And so that improvement is based on keeping our eyes and our ears open, building up social sensitivity with others so that we can hear, listen, and walk in their shoes. And so this is where it comes to building this whole notion of seeing this as a challenge, a desirable challenge about how we can improve and understand and esteem the fundamental mind frames for school leaders.